Robbie's here. Okay, Robbie's here. Okay.
Okay.
So, I'm going to try. How do we do the view? Here's Robert. Robert.
Hello, Robbie.
Good morning. Anna, how are you? Hello, Barry.
It's
Hey.
it's bedtime. It's bedtime for Bonzo, I'm afraid.
I've gone the past 5 years with no sleep, and last night was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Oh,
So, Robbie and Anna, it's great to see you.
Robbie, Robbie, can I just say commiserations and how hilarious you're running with Vicky's shoes. And I still want to know the answer to the question.
well, yesterday I interviewed Jack James, which was her first ever interview. So
Wow.
she did it. She waited to do it on our show, which was an honor for us. Anyway, and the purpose of the question becomes quite clear in that interview because we're trying to lay the basis for a court case. Uyghurs want to sue ASPI for them losing their jobs, and that's why Jack did what she did and wrote the report and got involved.
This is the Co-West report, yeah.
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 My wife, when she saw the question I asked, she was flabbergasted because she is used to me being much more boisterous, combative, confronting. I've gone to meetings to disrupt them before. I did not go to that meeting to disrupt it. I had the most. She thought the question was so bland it wasn't funny. She thought, "Why are you asking a question like that?" She didn't understand the strategy. I had to explain it to her. So yeah, we don't have an answer, but I'll tell you this about Vicky, because I've been at pains to explain to people. I am aware of the perception of me as a large, bald, or old white bald fuck or whatever she called me, against diminutive little Vicky, and I don't want to look threatening or etc. But when she's saying this stuff, she's smirking. I'm in the room with her. She is smirking. Right. And I've lost any kind of sympathy I've had for her, and now I'm getting threats because of the reporting that I'm right. Anyway. So we might even
such a dirty thing. It was such a dirty thing to do, and everything now. It's like we've gone back to Arthur Miller's Crucible. We did that at school.
Yeah.
And I remember we knew by the time we were 12 that pointing the finger and calling someone a witch is such like a low life, dishonest thing to do. And I can't believe those tactics are being used so crudely now. And I do sympathize. I can imagine, and especially in this atmosphere of Me Too, she knows exactly what she's playing.
Oh, for sure. Hey, but Anna, I have to say, when Barry said that you'd be on, I was thrilled because when I first started tweeting stuff, you get to recognize certain accounts, and yours was one of the earlier accounts I recognized. Like I came to know so I know who you are by your Twitter account, but I had no clue that I'd get to talk to you. So this is really thrilling for me.
Oh, well, thank you. And I learned about Jack James because I think you put that on one of my chats under one of my tweets. So that's how I got to learn about her. You both of you are amazing. And the other thing is I've got envy because Australia, although you've had the most awful fuck-witted prime minister, obviously you've got such a healthy rump of people who are challenging this, whereas here in Britain I look around and it's like there's no one. You've got former prime ministers, you've got politicians, there is nobody. It is like, seriously, it's like being in a science fiction scenario, and it just feels so unreal here.
Oh, well, that's interesting that's the case. It can feel a bit unreal here as well, but no, there is a growing resistance. Unfortunately, our new government, we had high hopes for it, but they're so scared of the Americans that I don't know what they're doing behind the scenes or what they're thinking, but for now they're just completely marching in lockstep. So it's going to take a bit to change it.
It's interesting you say that, Rob. That was going to be one of my first questions about the new government as is. You say you had high hopes for them. First, why? and second, you've just said that they seem to be running scared of the Americans, but is it that they just bought again the same as the last bunch and in the pocket?
Well, look, the first, to answer the first question, is because we're thinking nobody could be as bad as Scott Morrison and Peter Dutton.
Yeah.
In the election, it got to the point where Peter Dutton was because they knew they were going to lose, out of sheer desperation to shore up votes. They just went and incited hysteria over China and were openly talking of war, right? It was just totally bizarre. So you think, God, no one can be that bad. Well, you know, the Prime Minister and Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, are more measured in their language for sure. So that's a marginal improvement. But as soon as, his first job, as soon as he got elected, was to rush off to Japan for a Quad meeting and then rush over to Spain for the NATO meeting. And so his first 3 weeks in office, he is doing all this foreign policy stuff where all the decisions have already been made. Okay. And it's his job as the Prime Minister of Australia to go along with all that. And he's not a strong enough guy. He's no Gough Whitlam. Gough Whitlam was the last Australian Prime Minister to challenge American and British foreign policy, and he got sacked by the Queen for doing that.
The Queen, I was reading about that recently. The Queen was well in there,
And Labor's been cowardly pretty much ever since on these matters because of that experience. So there's cowardice. There's a thing called the Australian American Leadership Dialogue, which former Prime Minister Paul Keating has identified as a very important channel for corrupting his party and making sure that they lose any of that sense of foreign policy independence and march in lockstep. Okay. And it's a very effective foreign influence channel by the Americans and the people in Australia who want to do that. And then the buy-off bit, if you're raising the question, how they bought off. Yeah. Well, individually, I wouldn't tell you, but I will tell you this. While Australia's trading relationship is entirely China-centric because China is our biggest and best trading partner, right? Our financial system is entirely Anglo-American. And we can be really punished. Right. Really punished. The Gough Whitlam government, the first action they took against him in the 70s was they stopped lending him money. Okay. Right. And there was a creditors' strike against the Australian government. And if that happened now, we would be toast. So that's that hold over us is very, very powerful.
The dollar.
The dollar.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question. Dollar hegemony. Yeah. What might happen if the dollar suddenly plummeted, do you think?
Well, like the people who do business, they're already making it's fascinating.
Most of them are connected with an Australian university. ANU, is it?
Yeah, well, there's ANU is our leading sort of foreign policy university.
But from what I read, he has these.
Not Clive Palmer.
Yeah, that's the guy.
Oh, he's a fool. He's the worst. He's an absolute charlatan, this guy. Right. But he's a billionaire. I think it's insulting to Donald Trump to call Clive Palmer the Donald Trump of Australia. Really? And what he does, I'll give you an example of how much of a charlatan he is. In the election campaign, he attacked our parties. Wow. I mean, this guy, he is a scammer, man. I don't know how he fluked becoming a billionaire, and my God.
So you have these people that somehow climb the ladder to where they are and are able to impose their influence on everything, it seems. And Mr. Murdoch being in my eyes a prime example, who's been getting away with murder for a long time, and his effect is felt is not just Australia, obviously it's worldwide. How much influence does Murdoch have?
Oh, I should. There's a photo you can see of the Prime Minister of Australia in 2014, 2015, Tony Abbott, at an event where Murdoch was present, and Tony Abbott goes to talk to Murdoch, and Murdoch's sitting at his table. So the Prime Minister of Australia kneels down to talk to King Rupert.
King Rupert.
And of course, it's a coincidental photo, but it's so symbolic of how it actually works. Wow. This guy has had every prime minister terrified since the early 1970s, at least, maybe even a bit before that. I mean, Anna, you guys, he was the kingmaker of Tony Blair.
Tony Blair, no, absolutely. I remember that very, very well. I mean, I have to say, I always think of Murdoch as the world's biggest stalker now, because it almost feels like revenge for Wendy Deng, because while he was married to Wendy, there's this period, this so-called golden era between well, certainly the UK and China. And I noticed, after there was supposed to have been this this intimate friendship between Wendy and Tony sort of disappeared off the scene. It was almost like he was put on the naughty step by Murdoch. That's how it felt. Wow. And his press have always been awful in presenting stuff. The Wall Street Journal, a lot of the COVID lab stuff starts with Wall Street Journal, and I can go back 20 years. So in 2000, the UK was struck by this awful foot and mouth disease outbreak. Tony Blair absolutely screwed it up. You had farmers committing suicide, these pictures of pyres of burning cattle. And suddenly, we all woke up to the papers, the Times, owned by Murdoch since 1981. So this is 2001. Suddenly, the UK Chinese are being accused of starting the outbreak. Really? This had been an outpost of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAF, up in Northumberland, had apparently briefed Valerie Elliott of the Times that this was the case, and then all the rest of the press followed suit. And so that went on, and that was the first time. I thought it was quite frightening, because it was like the state had decided to scapegoat a group to save Tony Blair's skin. We fought back, and we surprised everyone by holding a demo, bringing Chinatown in London to a halt, and also there was something up in Manchester as well. We ended up with an apology from Nick Brown. I was in the delegation that went and negotiated with him. He seemed genuinely really embarrassed and apologetic, as if this had been done like around the minister. So we got our vindication, but that moment I thought, I wonder what the future holds, because I thought, that's incredible. If they can try that, surely though there is no end to their madness and meanness. And so, here we are.
That's astonishing, because I was aware of the foot and mouth and the pyres of burning. They burnt the entire herd of Britain. They burnt the lot, and it's like, really? This is a little bit strange. So just hacking back a couple of paragraphs, Murdoch's influence in Australia, in the UK, the kingmaker of Blair, as has been stated here. This influence, I'm trying to get a picture of the gang. So Blair comes to prominence and gets he's chosen. He's always going to be the guy, isn't he? So is it just one gang? Is it really just one gang? Or I read recently that for example, Soros and Murdoch had a little spat, that Soros was not so happy with Murdoch. And so you're thinking, well, okay, if there's a gang, if there's a boardroom of 100 people who are organizing and arranging all the West's business, there is infighting in the boardroom too.
Well, that, I think, of course, that happens, but there's an Anglo-American establishment,
right,
which exists to serve one thing: maintain the unipolar world order.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So they have different views, maybe about at certain times as to tactics, etc. But if you just take a simple example of the division in the United States, you have on the one side the neoconservatives, who think they orchestrate wars like the Iraq War to maintain their supremacy, and a lot of them are Republicans. On the other side, on the Democrat side, they call themselves liberal interventionists. So the Murdoch's on the neoconservative side, George Soros is on the other side, but they end up doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Right? They orchestrate wars to maintain American supremacy. So
yeah.
That's,
sorry.
Look at the outcomes. There's not, different tactics maybe, but look at the outcomes.
It all boils down to the same thing. Yeah. Go on, Anna. Sorry.
I think it's really interesting when you do look at where these fissures and splits are happening, because I thought it was quite interesting that Boris Johnson, as loathsome as he is, and the whole COVID thing is another thing, but he dragged his heels over Huawei. And it wasn't until Pompeo came over to, negotiate post-Brexit trade agreements. And I remember saying at the time, we're going to see a shift, because he's going to come with not just with a carrot, but with a big stick this time. And that's what happened there. The fact that you're hearing all this negative stuff about Boris Johnson, the state has files on everyone. They all have crimes and misdemeanors that they've got up to, and I'm always curious, why is it they're turning on the tap, and pouring it onto this particular person right now? I don't think Johnson quite has the appetite for war in Asia as he obviously does in Ukraine, in Europe. So it's like wheels within wheels, and trying to work out who is on whose side and who has the different interests going here.
And who's at the top of this tree? Robbie, what's your opinion on that? I know there's a connection. I know there's a connection, for example, between Murdoch and Rothschild, the Golan Heights, Israel. They got given the oil rights to the Golan Heights, which is Syrian territory. So I know there's a big connection between these guys. So, but just your
we've done a lot of we've done a lot of work on the history and the dynamics of this. Our take is that the top of this is the financial world order and who controls that, because it's like the nature of the British Empire now. The British Empire seemingly doesn't exist. Now, if Jamaica becomes a republic, now that the Queen has died, that'll be seen as more example of the erosion of the British Empire. But I'll tell you what won't become a republic: the Cayman Islands. Okay. Because that's where the British Empire really still rules the world. Okay. The offshore system, and there's people who've documented this, what the City of London did post World War II to create the offshore system through which they still control the world's financial flows. Now, right. So you've got it's like a mafia between London's, and it's really remarkable. London is still the biggest financial center in the world, right? Right. Because that's where the power reigns supreme. So London, Wall Street, these entities control their governments. Forget democracy. It's a joke. And that's why our financial system is completely controlled by these entities. What China has absolutely achieved is an alternative world economic system. Okay. And countries are gravitating towards it. China, so and just a little minor example so that people can see the difference. Our party, our number one policy is to bring back a public bank for Australia, a government bank.
Yeah.
Because all the banks are private. Now, when banks are private, they get to operate like an oligopoly, and they do everything they can to maximize their profits, right? And consequently, you get a lot of abuse by the banking system, and the economy is shaped in a certain way. What a public bank can do while still being profitable, but not pursuing maximum profit, is show you that, hey, there's a lot of power in banking, and you can make sure that power works for the public, for the common good. You can invest long-term in things, etc.
Yeah.
And that's why the private banks are our biggest enemies in Australia, because they don't want that back. They don't want their behavior to be exposed by just the performance of what a government bank can do.
Yeah.
So to us, it's similar to the way what China's showing in the world, that there's an alternative way to run economies and to run a financial system and to do international trade and international finance. Look at all the loans they forgive to these African countries, etc. Right? Because now, is China the most charitable country in history? I mean, it probably is, but that's not its main motivation. It knows that long term, it will benefit from Africa being a developed economy, right? And it's happy to contribute to that. And that is a mortal threat to the way London and Wall Street have run the world for decades, and not decades, centuries, right? And that's at the top. In our view, that's at the top, and everything flows from that.
Where does Murdoch sit in that? If, as you say, the financial centres are controlling it, the Wall Street and London, pretty much that's it.
Well, do you know his history? There's a fascinating thing about his history here, because he's actually part of an unbroken continuum of media magnates going back a century. Who have served the Anglo-American, and especially in his case, the education was the British elite. Right. So you had these Lord Rothermere and Lord Northcliffe back in a century ago, were the big tabloid media guys in the UK. You had Lord Beaverbrook come over from Canada, and he and Lord Northcliffe were the big, in World War One. They were the Ministry for Information. They were the propagandists for world. In fact, when propaganda wasn't a dirty word, they were the British propagandists in World War One. And then Rupert Murdoch's father went to the UK, trained under Lord Northcliffe in his tabloid techniques, came back to Australia, started what is now the News Corp empire. It was a bit rough on old young Rupert, actually, apparently, but that's sort of like in the old British public school tradition. You know, treat them mean and make sure they grow up like you, kind of thing. And then when he died, when his father died, Rupert had some mentors around him. And the first thing he did was go and spend, I think it was called the Express that Lord Beaverbrook had after World War II. Right. And Rupert went and interned there for a while to learn those methods of media propaganda, which because of the role of these guys in both wars, these were actual propagandists. Now, you know, there's a role for that in war, but it's still, you got to call it what it is, still propaganda. There's methods you employ, and that's what trained young Rupert, right? And so what the narrative I've never bought into is this idea that, Rupert was this disruptor who came along and flipped the finger at the establishment. Right. Yeah, that's all smoke. That's all, political charade, right? Right. Like any pinstriped, pipe smoking old British toff that he insulted, that's one thing. But he's not a threat to the establishment. He's not a threat to who really rules the UK or Australia, right? He makes sure they always stay in power, and he makes sure that look what Jeremy Corbyn just went through. Yeah. Right. I mean, you look at Jeremy Corbyn on economic policy and foreign policy. You've had previous governments in the UK, like Clement Attlee after World War II, who transformed the British economy domestically to benefit the English people. But on foreign policy, he was just as much a disaster as the rest of them. They just pursued the policy of the empire. A lot of the atrocities that people now understand for the British Empire still occurred under his watch, right? He perpetrated them. Jeremy Corbyn, as far from everything I've seen, was totally unique. He was a threat to the establishment on economics, and a bigger threat to the establishment on foreign policy.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happened to him? The biggest media assassination campaign in the history of the world. Yeah. Right. And it worked.
If I can just interject there,
absolutely,
the snap election in 2017 was a very strong chance. They were going to get in because people had had enough of the Tories. They had the biggest political party in Europe because people were flocking to that party. I myself joined in order to vote for him. So you had this chance in the snap election, and they basically sabotaged it. What they had was the element of surprise. They were either going to win that election or it was over. They were never going to get the same chance. So when all the polls were showing that Labour under Corbyn were basically going to get a landslide, somebody in their office started muddying the waters, because if you remember around Brexit, we didn't know, where does he stand? Is he pro-Brexit? Is he anti-Brexit? So all of this was muddied. And just as the polls were saying, oh my goodness, it looks like, he could win, suddenly the word was put out, well, of course, he's pro-Brexit. You had people who were on the knocker drumming up support for getting the vote out, who were suddenly meeting with resistance from people who were confused because they didn't know. And at that point, I just wanted him to pick a side and stick with it. Now, 2 or 3 weeks before the actual election, suddenly they put out a statement, or I don't even recall the statement, but word got out, no, Jeremy is for Remain and Reform. And this is why I just do not trust it at all. They had the chance. They could have, it was an open door. Everyone wanted him to get in, and they sabotaged it. And if you remember, just once they clarified where he stood, suddenly the polls were looking up again, but they'd lost the momentum. So what happened? They, everything just ground to a halt, and they lost by something like 3,000 votes. 3,000 votes, depending on how you count it. So I think that's quite serious.
But Anna, you've confirmed what I saw from here. It's like, to me, it's like the one compromise he made. Like, he didn't to fit in with his party, because he always was pro-Brexit. Like, no, he was part of the Labour Party that always opposed the European Union for good reasons, right? But he won the leadership in an extraordinary fashion, totally unpredictably, and then it's the one compromise that he didn't. It was the most un-Corbyn thing he ever did, and he paid for it. And that part is on him. But the rest of it is the power of the media, led by the way Murdoch works. The way they can, like, this anti-Semitism thing that he had to deal with.
He was assassinated, yeah.
But that was afterwards. That was why there were various voices, I think I may have been one of them, who was saying, you need to get in. Whatever happens, you've got to win this election. Because after this, if you lose, they are going to come after you, and it's not going to be a pretty sight.
It wasn't. So
guys, there's one, I got to tell you, hang on, I got to interrupt you very briefly. I've got a flash thing on my screen saying this is going to end in 1 minute. So if it stops, I'll start another meeting, okay?
Oh, okay.
Or when it stops, because it's going to.
Okay. Well, just to finish that point, this Murdoch is very, very effective at what he does, but it's a long, it's a long unbroken continuum that he's part of. He's just very